Well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is taking time this afternoon or this week to enjoy this beautiful weather that we're having. I know that we're in double digits finally, 20 or above 20, I guess. It'd be 29 today and 26 yesterday, and I think it's going to continue on for the rest of the week, which I am so thankful for. So I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to CCI South Alberta's first webinar. I feel like we're kind of behind the times a bit, but I'm really excited that we're able to bring this webinar to you. Today's event is going to be focused on Speedy board meetings and the art of taking minutes. And I've got to tell you that minute taking is probably one of my favorite functions. I absolutely love taking minutes. The presentation will cover essentials in agenda planning, meeting rules, and effective meetings. So I am so excited to be able to, as a group, be able to offer you this today. So I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping rules before we start. So for those of you who have never participated in a webinar, we will be muting all attendees during the presentation. So this is going to allow our speaker to be able to give his presentation thoroughly right through to the end. You will have an opportunity to type your question into the chat button that's located at the bottom of your screen. So please ensure that the icon all panelists or all panelists and attendees is clear at the bottom and that you can see it. And essentially all you have to do is just enter the enter button and then send your question over to us as well. Arlene, our administrator, she will be fielding the comments as they come up, and either the speaker or myself will do our very best to respond to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation this afternoon. So who is CCI? So the Canadian Condominium Institute is an independent, nonprofit organization. It was formed in 1982. And I'm happy to say that we have over 17 chapters across country. Two chapters here in Alberta. One is located in Edmonton and the other is here in Calgary. One of CCI's main objective is education. So we do tons of education with our members and those in the public who would like to understand a little bit more about the condominium community. So we are able to provide and do that through various forms, which is your luncheons, your webinars, just like today, courses, and of course, our mini workshops. Okay, so I'm sure you figured it out, but my name is Maria Bartolotti and I will be moderating the webinar for this afternoon. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I was born and raised in Calgary, Alberta. This is a city that I call home, which I love. I have a cute little Maltipoo by the name of Dexter, who loves to spend his time with me, and I love spending my time with him as well. I started my career in the condominium property industry back in 2001 and have remained actively involved in the condominium community for about roughly about 19 years. I'm the owner of New Concept Management, a condominium property management firm based right here in Calgary, Alberta. And anyone who knows me knows that I am just passionate about this industry. I love it, and I just can't ever see myself doing anything besides condominium management. I'm also an active member on the Canadian Condominium Institute South Alberta chapter as the chair of the Education Committee and member of the Board of Directors. I hold my prestigious FCCI, which is the Fellowship of the Canadian Condominium Institute, and my ACCI, which is the Accredited Canadian Condominium Institute designations. And just as I mentioned earlier, I've been practicing and teaching public speaking and providing education to the condominium community for roughly about 19 years. Now, for our speaker, I am so pleased to have this individual be a part of this webinar. Simply because I think that the form of minute taking and how we run our board meetings is so essential in this industry. So I am very, very pleased to have Todd Brand of Todd Brand Consulting join us here today. Just a little bit of background on Todd. Todd is a professional registered parliamentarian with the National Association of Parliamentarians. He serves as the Alberta Association of Parliamentarians as the president of their board. Todd serves on the board of trustees of one of Canada's fastest growing school divisions and has over 20 years of experience in teaching, public speaking, and providing workshops. So I am very pleased to be able to have Todd here with us today. Our administrator, Elaine, our wonderful administrator, Elaine, who really keeps us on track with everything that we do, she will be looking after the technical side today, and she'll be reviewing the chat area for questions throughout the presentation. And she'll help moderate, and she'll help co-host today's presentation as well. So I'm very thankful to have Elaine as well. Now, keep in mind that the webinar is roughly an hour in length. So we will have time for a few questions at the end of the presentation, but may not be able to get to all your questions. As much as I would love to get to all the questions, I don't know if that's going to be feasible or even possible. However, if we don't, you can always email Elaine, and whatever questions we were unable to answer, we will certainly do that via email. We will be recording the presentation for today. So bearing any technical issues, of course, it will be available on the CCI Alberta website, and a link will be issued to all of you as well. Okay, just a quick disclaimer as well. Just a reminder that the webinar for this afternoon is not intended to provide you with specific opinions for your individual circumstances. The information that you are being provided today are guidelines to help you become more efficient in your role as a condo manager, as a board member, as the secretary, a minute taker. So it's more for reference for you. You should also just keep in mind that anytime that we do these presentations, you also want to ensure that you're referencing back to your bylaws, as well as the Condominium Property Act of Alberta, and just reviewing governance when it comes to minute taking and being a board member. Very, very important. So I think it's time for me to stop talking and turn this presentation to Todd Brand. Thank you.
Right, well, good to be here with you guys. I'm just gonna work here just to get screen sharing going here. And I will ask if my PowerPoint is up. Can I get a confirmation from Maria or Elaine that my PowerPoint is showing?
It is, and it looks great, Todd.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Just wanted to make sure we had that up and running before we continue here. So good, well, very pleased to be with all of you here today, and to be able to talk about something that is a topic that is obviously very close to my heart, being a parliamentarian, to be able to talk about meetings. All of us attend a lot of meetings, and for some of you, it is probably way more meetings than you are comfortable with. You wish you could reduce the number of meetings that you had. For other people like myself, you might be in the position where you actually enjoy meetings and you like taking part in them. On either side, I hope you'll find today's information really useful for you. I would say that because of my enjoyment of meetings, I've also come to have very high expectations for the quality of what meetings can be. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's okay for us to have high expectations and to expect that our meetings can be highly productive. And I hope that what I share with you today might give you a little bit of ideas and maybe even some encouragement. If your meetings have become a little bit wearisome, perhaps not as productive as you would like them to be, I hope you'll be encouraged by the end of today that there are some things that you can do that will help your meetings to be more productive, to be sped up a little bit, and even to be a bit more fun. So what is the plan for today? So we're going to cover a few things in a very condensed period of time. So I think what my goal for today is to point you in a direction of some ideas, some tips, possibly some resources, and give you some principles that you can think about and ponder. I think you might be frustrated just with the pace of today and trying to put a lot of information into a short time frame. You might be frustrated if you were to take this as a checklist of all the things that you need to get done in the next month before your next meeting. I think a better approach to this would be to try and listen to a few ideas that would resonate for you and say, you know what, I'm going to pull 2 or maybe 3 ideas out of this conversation and try and implement those 2 or 3 things for the next meeting. I think that would be a more productive way to approach it. And that way we can cover a lot of information and not feel like we're trying to cover too much. I wanted to just briefly share as we get going here a little bit about my context and my background so that you kind of understand the sort of the way that I approach meetings and how I come to meetings. I have a unique opportunity as a parliamentarian that I get to, although I'm involved in the meetings I'm a part of, I'm also observing a lot of what goes on. Now, I do a lot of work where I'm a part of a board, and in that case, I'm immersed right in the middle of all the details. And when you're immersed in the details, you don't often take that high-level view sometimes and say, what's actually going on and what actually is taking place within the meeting context. And one of the great privileges of being a parliamentarian is I do get those opportunities to kind of have that more bird's eye view and say, and from an outsider type of view and say, what types of things are happening in meetings that are speeding them up, making them productive, and what other things are happening that are maybe taking away that productivity and making the meetings not nearly as productive. So you'll see in your screen just a list of some of the ways that I engage with and work with boards of different kinds. And I very much enjoy that opportunity that is afforded to us as parliamentarians. So when we boil it down, what are board meetings all about? It's really, board meetings are about making good decisions. One way or another, you will make decisions. Will they be good or not? That's a really good question. I think the way that we approach our meetings and the process that we put in place goes a long ways to helping us get towards good decisions. A good process will never be a guarantee that you are going to have a great decision at the end of your meeting, but a good process will certainly increase the chances that you are going to have good dialogue, good healthy debate, and be able to move towards a productive decision that will help your organization, in this case your condo board, move ahead and get stronger. So from my perspective, what are some of the things that we're aiming for in a good meeting? There's a number of things. One is we want to have a really good sense of order, having a good plan in place and a clear agenda to follow. And I won't talk about that much right now at this moment because it's going to be one of my slides, is to talk about how the agenda can be used in your favor and to your advantage in your meeting planning. A second thing is focus, making sure that we're covering one item at a time. And certainly if you've been part of the large association meetings where you've got 400 or 500 people and there's a lot of amendments going on, you say, boy, I've seen sometimes those big meetings really go astray and nobody really knows quite what we're talking about. But that can also happen at the board level. Typically, everyone knows the topic that's being talked about, but oftentimes we get off on tangents that aren't really related to the actual decision that we have to make. So keeping focused on not just the topic, but the actual decision that we're heading towards can be one way to really speed up our meetings. Efficiency, moving the meeting forward in a timely manner. Now, one of the things I'll come up to in just a few moments is how the chair has an important role in helping to keep the forward momentum of the meeting taking place and making sure that things are progressing at a good pace. And it's a big responsibility, but we'll talk a little bit about how that can be done. Fairness. I'm not sure if all of you use Robert's rules or have some type of parliamentary authority that guides your meetings. Most organizations and most boards do. The reason that we use a set of rules, a parliamentary procedures authority, is in part because we want the meetings to be functional. We want them to go in a certain order and be clear. But there's another really important aspect, and that is we want to make sure that our meetings have a good sense of fairness. And what I mean by fairness, we want to make sure the majority gets the right to make a decision. The majority is the one at the end of the day that decides what the organization is going to do or not going to do. As well, you want to protect the rights of the minority. Those who have a differing opinion need to have a chance to voice their concerns, to enter into debate and bring up divergent opinions. That's still important, and we need to make sure that's protected. And when we use a parliamentary authority and we have rules for our meetings, that also means that we have protection in for the rights of absentees. Those who are not even at the meeting also need their rights protected, which is why we have laws and bylaws and parliamentary rules that protect some decisions from being made in the absence of notice, so that those who were absent would not be surprised by what decisions were made. Decorum, debate that is robust, healthy, and respectful. We could do an entire workshop on how to have healthy debate, but we know that's an important part of meetings. And one that's really critical is involved. We know how much a bully board member, if we go back to decorum, someone who's really trying to dominate the meeting, we know how they can take over a meeting. But there's another problem. That's when people choose not to be engaged. We want to make sure that we get the expertise and opinions of everybody on the board. We assume that each person is there for an important reason. And sometimes the silence and uninvolvement of a board member can also be a problem. So those are some of the things that we look for. Now, when I say speedy board meetings, I want to be a little bit careful here. I want to make sure that you understand that we're not talking about hasty board meetings. It's not just about getting to the end and saying, hey, we're done, good, we got through this. Doesn't matter what we decided, but we're done. It's not the point. The point isn't to make it so that we don't have a healthy process. But I firmly believe that we can have efficient, speedy meetings while still maintaining a very effective process for our meetings. I believe we can maintain that integrity. There's even a few boards out there. You might have come here saying, okay, let's talk about board meetings, how we can speed them up. But you might actually find or start thinking through as this workshop goes on, you might start thinking, you know what, maybe our meetings actually need to slow down a little bit because we're not getting everyone involved. We're not hearing everyone's opinion. The good news, I think, for today's session is that the principles that we're going to talk about really focus on not wasting time. So whether you're speeding up your meetings because they're taking too long, or you're even slowing them down because you need to get more involvement and get better decision making, either way, what you don't want to be doing is wasting time. And that's a really big component of what we're going to examine together. So together, let's work on improving speed, getting us toward better decision making, and improving the process of our meetings. One of the first things that I wanted to bring up to you as a practical suggestion for how you can accomplish these speedier meetings is to make your agenda work for you and not against you. And there's a number of ways that you can do this. And we'll start with the assumption that you're using a written agenda. If not, that'll be step one, is getting an agenda put in place for your meetings. But I know most boards do have an agenda going into a meeting. One suggestion that I have is to use time suggestions for each of the different components of your meeting. There's a couple of small disadvantages to this, but I think the advantages outweigh them, and I'll explain that as we go on. It's a simple tool of, let's say, putting in brackets beside an item that you suggest it's going to be a 2-minute or a 5-minute or perhaps a 30-minute item. Their only disadvantage to doing this is sometimes you'll put 30 minutes beside an item, and really you could have got that one done in 20 minutes. And I think the answer to that issue is to try and always develop a culture of efficiency. As you're going into each item saying, you know what, folks, we've got 30 minutes put aside to cover this next board item. It might take 30. If it's really important, we have some, maybe we have to do a few extra, but let's see if we can get it done in 20 and move on to the next item on our agenda. The reason though I give this to you as a suggestion, it's for those small items. When people see a list of 7 items and they all look equal on the agenda, oftentimes you'll take a long time on each of those 7 items. So they all become 30-minute items. So putting in a 2 minutes or a 5 minutes beside an item can often just trigger in a person's head, hey, you know what, this should just be a simple item. It's really straightforward. It's probably not a lot to discuss here. Let's get this one done and move on to the ones that we know are lengthier decisions. Second idea that I have for you is to put your contentious or your difficult items at the end of the meeting. So simply put, people are almost always more interested in those big ticket items, the ones that are a bit meatier, have some more important things to discuss. They want to get to those. If you put those at the end, you'll find that the most of your board members are going to move more quickly through the earlier items. Hopefully they've got 2s and 5s beside them, because they're going to want to get to the big issue, the one that everyone's been thinking about, the one that's on everyone's mind. If you do it in reverse, you'll often get towards the end of the meeting, you've got 5 or 10 minutes left, you finally get the big item completed, and all of a sudden you've got 6 more items that you've got to figure out how you're going to take care of those. So simple tool, but one I think that can be very effective. A third thing is to consider a consent agenda. And this will depend in part on the complexity of your board and how many decisions you have to process in a given meeting. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with this term, some also, by the way, call it a consent calendar. It's basically referring to the same device. What this is grouping together a lot of smaller decisions, typically routine things that are not going to be controversial, and putting them together in one vote at the meeting. This can save time because it's a simple tool to basically group them together and make sure that you're not wasting time processing each and every one of them separately. I give you some examples on your screen that you can see of some things that could be included there, things like minutes, the approval of agenda, perhaps some housekeeping items that you've got going. Condo boards are a bit notorious for having to ratify previous decisions because a lot of times a decision came up in the middle of the week and you had to make a decision as a board about some type of expense authorization. And so the board quickly meets in an informal way, makes a decision, and then later that decision has to get ratified. Typically, ratification is a pretty simple process. So you could put those into your consent agenda and you can deal with all those as one business item. There's a protection built into this, by the way, that any single member, not by majority, but just a single member can say, hey, you know what, I really want to pull out that one item and deal with that separately. And by their request, if you want to worded, you can bring that out and that will be dealt with separately at the meeting. But typically, whatever's on the consent calendar typically will stay through right until the meeting decision is made and you've covered a whole bunch of items with one vote. And the final thing, and I won't deal with this too much right now because I'm going to come back to it in just a moment, but make sure the end time for your meeting is also on. We all put down, we're starting at 7:00 p.m. Make sure you have the end time noted down as well. And I'll come back in a moment as to why I feel that's very important. Special rules of order. Now, this tool that I'm going to encourage you to consider using, again, trying to pull out 2 or 3 ideas today that you can use. This may be a tool that you'll find helpful for your particular circumstance with your board. Again, sounds complicated, it's really not. What a special rules of order does, it takes, for example, if you use, maybe you use Robert's Rules of Order as your parliamentary authority, you use some other official rules of order, but you find that not all the rules are beneficial to you, or there's some rules within Robert's Rules that you feel need to actually be emphasized more because they're buried in the 780-page document. So what a special rules of order does, these rules usually stand outside of your bylaws, and it's pretty clear, as you'll see from my bottom bullet, they cannot conflict with your bylaws. This is not a way to get around a bylaw that you're not interested in or you don't like or that's slowing you down, but it is a way to get around the rules in a parliamentary authority. So some simple ideas that you could put on maybe a 10-rule special rules of order. Here's a few suggestions would be each board member talks once only until everyone who wants to speak has done so. In a somewhat informal meeting, and I totally get the condo boards are much less formal than your meetings with 300 or 400 people, and every one of your boards would have a different level of formality based on your culture and the size of your group and how long you've been working together. But regardless of the level of formality, it really shouldn't turn into a board meeting where people are having arguments, even unheated arguments across the table where 2 people are talking back and forth constantly and other people are kind of silenced out. So one rule that you could put in is simply every board member has 1 chance to talk. When everyone's had their turn, then you get your 2nd or your 3rd chance after that. It can be a great way to speed up board meetings. Another idea would be to put down that motions on new business have to be submitted a week in advance. Another thing that can really slow down our meetings is somebody comes with 4 or 5 other topics that they didn't bother to send in. The chair has the meeting planned out, or maybe the condo manager is responsible to put together the meeting plan, and now you've got 5 things that are being brought forward that nobody was expecting. And another one might be just speaking only after being recognized. Again, to avoid that idea that this is a free-for-all, and I'm not even talking again about a negative where everyone's yelling and shouting, but it can be a free-for-all and be polite, but it can have a sense of lack of order. Now, I'm only giving these as examples of special rules, and we won't talk much longer on this for today, but I will advise you that you can adopt these by a simple motion as a board, and Robert's Rules can give you some guidance on how to go about adopting these. They can be suspended in any meeting with a 2/3 vote. So let's say someone did come with 2 ideas of something important to talk about, and at least 2/3 of the group think, we really should add these to the agenda. That's not an issue. This isn't a bylaw that is being broken. This is a rule that you've created, and with a 2/3 in agreement or more, usually just done by unanimous consent, we say, is there anybody who objects to us adding these 2 items because they do really seem to be important? We probably should cover them today. So it's a rule list that will help you, but it's also soft enough that you can make changes to it, but it provides you some protection. And already mentioned, make sure that it doesn't conflict with your bylaws. Another idea for you on a totally different vein of thoughts here. These aren't really rules, but they're suggestions. Maybe some of these could be rules for you as well, but consider putting a tent card in the middle of your table once you're back to meeting in person. If you're still meeting online, which of course most of us in our boards and work now are meeting online, we don't know how long that will be, and maybe some boards will choose to meet online well into the future, even when we're allowed to have in-person meetings again. So if you're meeting in person, put this in the middle of your table on a tent card. If you're meeting online, consider typing it into the text box at the start of every meeting. Maybe the chair will say, I'm gonna, every half an hour of our meeting, I'm gonna pop this back into the text box just as a reminder so that everyone can see it. And it's a list of things that we want to be asking ourselves. And part of this comes out of my role as an elected trustee for Rocky View Schools. And Maria mentioned my involvement as a school board trustee. I've both been a chair and a vice chair and a regular member of the board. And I'll tell you what, I have to ask these questions to myself quite often because sometimes I can find myself helping to lead the meeting in a direction through my debate, through my arguments. I'm leading us in a direction that's not getting us toward a good decision. So some of the questions that I try and ask myself are these types of questions. One, am I making this issue more important than it really is? If you are a debater by nature, and you can ask anyone in my family, I am a debater by nature. That's just the way I'm wired. I like to debate things. Are you making an issue more important? Because you like that process of debate, are you actually taking up a lot of time on an issue that really isn't all that important at the end of the day? Another question that board members could ask themselves, and they see this visually in front of them throughout the meeting, am I saying anything new? You have the right to speak in debate, whether it's for or against the direction that the rest of the group is wanting, you have that right. But you don't have the right to keep repeating those same points over and over again. And a good reminder for board members who do that could be just placed in that middle of the table and a reminder that that's not really an acceptable way to debate in a board meeting. Am I sharing the microphone? Am I hogging the time? Is my voice being heard a lot more than others? Am I listening when I'm not talking? And this is a great reminder for all of us when we're in a board meeting. When I'm finished debating, am I just trying to formulate my next thought? Or am I listening carefully to what the others around the table are saying so that I can hopefully get to that next bullet point, which is, can I help us find a new path forward? There will be some members of your board who are gifted at this, and they'll always be the ones you'll turn to this, but every member of your board has the capability to say, you know what, I think as I'm listening to what I said, and I'm now listening to what you said, here's maybe a different way. Let's take parts of both of those ideas, and can we find a new way forward? I hope it's obvious to all of you listening right now that these types of questions, if you're asking them throughout the meeting, will help to speed your board meetings up in a very effective manner. These types of questions will help keep your own dialogue, your own entry into the debate in a good sense of order, and will help to speed the meetings up. And the final one is, should I speak up more on this? And that might not be a time saver at first glance, but it actually can be. Because if you, as a quiet board member, continue to let the ones who always like to do the talking talk, they're never going to stop taking their turn. And so one way that we can help to control that type of behavior, and that usually people are not doing the over talking because they're a bad person. They're just usually excited and ambitious and want to get things done. But those who are not talking can help to curb that by speaking up more often and taking part in the discussion. Now, the chair sets the pace and tone. And I don't want the board chairs who are listening in today to feel like all the pressure is on them to keep the pace of the meeting. The last slide that we just covered should make it very clear that every board member has a role to play in keeping the pace of a meeting on target and keep it moving ahead. But there's no question that the chair has an even bigger responsibility for whether meetings are going to be efficient or not. And the truth is, board chairs cannot control every factor of a meeting. Some factors are out of their control. What a good board chair will do, however, is they will say, here are the things that I can control. These are the things that are within my control area, and I'm going to work hard to make sure that I'm working these into a good sense of efficiency. So here's a few ideas. One is to start all meetings on time and end all meetings on time. Obviously, having quorum in place is important. Once you've got that quorum, get the meeting started right away. Now, we all know this, and you've probably heard this in other workshops, but sometimes we need a reminder to actually make this happen. It's pretty clear and obvious that if other board members realize the meetings don't start till 10 or 15 minutes past the posted time, there's no point in me getting there, rushing and being prepared. Sometimes people will get there on time, but they'll use that first 10 or 15 minutes where there's wasted time because nothing gets started. They'll use that to review their notes. Not a healthy habit. Get started. The first couple of times it might be awkward because you'll be having less than full attendance, but people will get the idea, hey, these meetings always start on time. The ending is also key, and this one can be a huge problem, and it's probably why some of you may have tuned in today is, and hopefully all of these things will help you to get the meetings ending at a certain time. But I strongly encourage boards to pick an end time. Let's say it's going to be 9 o'clock. It's a 2-hour meeting. Many times those meetings are supposed to end then. They push till 10 or 10:30. I've got a couple of suggestions for you. One of the suggestions is simply make it a rule that within a couple minutes of lead time, you're going to stop the meeting exactly at the time that you have posted on the agenda. Now, there's obviously a couple of issues at stake. What if there are some issues that have to be decided before the next meeting? What I encourage board chairs to do, at least to consider trying this, is to get in the habit of, if we're not done by 9 o'clock, we're going to adjourn this meeting to another meeting a week or maybe 2 weeks later, definitely before the next one, and we're going to finish the business at that adjourned meeting. Some of you might be listening and saying, you know, that actually sounds like it's wasting more time. Wouldn't it be better just to push on 30 or 40 more minutes, get the meeting done with, and not have to have another meeting to come back to a week later? The problem I see with that is once you get into that habit, you might as well assume all your meetings are going to end 40 minutes or more late, because that'll just be the habit. People will be getting close to that 9 o'clock cutoff time. They'll know they really actually have another 45 minutes. So there's going to be no pressure to speed up their decisions, their comments, their debate. By having that end time, you'll force a little bit of healthy pressure on people to make those decisions. A second option within all of that is if those items really could wait till the next meeting, then you don't even need to have the adjourned meeting. You simply end at 9 o'clock, the meeting is over, and those items that were not finished get pushed on to the next meeting. And then you work to try and get them covered there. Either way, I think that this is a good thing for some boards to explore. It will seem awkward and a bit painful to begin with, but I think it will lead you to some good results. Maintaining focus and keeping members on track. The board chair, you unfortunately have the responsibility to help make sure people are staying on topic. This doesn't have to be confrontational. And I really encourage board chairs to use some type of a script, no matter how informal your meetings are. I encourage you to have a script of sentence starters that you can have, that you will use as you're getting started in on what I would call a very soft confrontation. So you're in the middle of a debate point, somebody starts talking about, you guys, I forgot to mention about my camping trip last weekend. We went to XYZ campground and it was just really great. I won't take too long on this, but you know what, you want to bring that person obviously back on board. Tangents are very seldom useful in a board meeting. So what you can often have is just a simple way of saying to that person, say, John, you know what, listen, I really want to hear about that because that actually is a place I was thinking about camping myself, but we've got to stay on topic. We've got to stay towards the decision that we're trying to make. Once you've done that once or twice in a meeting, it won't seem awkward any longer. And the rest of the people sitting around your board table will silently, or maybe even out loud, be applauding you as taking good ownership of the meeting. Controlling the time. As a board chair, you have the task of making sure that you're moving through in an efficient manner and trying to speed items up so that you can get through each item on time. And I would encourage board chairs to remember that it is your job to deal with problem behavior and not to ignore it. And of course, again, this is another one that could be a whole workshop in itself. You don't always have to deal with the problem behavior right at that particular meeting. You might be able to wait until after the meeting and have a conversation, but don't let problems persist meeting after meeting. Again, the rest of your board members are expecting you to help take control of those situations, and it's a part of your role as board chair. Maybe more than you bargained for when you got elected as chair, but nonetheless, the responsibility is yours to cover. Info ahead of time. Most of us do this. We get our information out to our board members, but there are some boards, and maybe you fall into this category, then after getting it out early, maybe a week or so before the meeting, then you spend time reviewing it. Well, perhaps you're like me, that drives you crazy when meeting time is taken up reviewing things that I've already spent time reviewing. So a simple example of this might be that you've got a major repair project coming up that you have to make a decision on. So the condo manager has put out bids. You've now got 3 bids that are worth looking at. Perhaps the condo manager has put together a 1 or 2 page document that summarizes the bids. And depending on the culture of your board, perhaps they've given a recommendation as well and said, here's a recommendation of how I think we should proceed in the bid that we should look at. If you get those types of things out a week or so ahead of time, I strongly encourage board chair not to take time to review those. You're probably not going to talk about the bids at all because you've expected members to read and prepare their questions. My job as a board member is to look through those ahead of time and be about 80% decided on what I think should be done as I go into the meeting. I say not 100% because we should always be open to change our minds, but we go in with a leading saying, you know what, I'm pretty sure I agree with the condo manager. This seems to make sense. I've gone through all this. So at the meeting, all you do is maybe a very quick 30-second review of the recommendations from the condo manager, and you go right into the debate on whether we should proceed with the condo manager's recommendation, or should we back this up? Do we need more information? Should we wait a bit longer? Should we get some more bids? But we don't waste that valuable, precious meeting time going over information that we already should have covered. Now, we're going to switch gears in a big way and talk about minutes, as we've got a few minutes left before we go to some questions and answers. And again, minutes are an important part of usually the board secretary's role. And minutes themselves can become a beast all in and of themselves, and can actually be, they should be a very helpful tool. They're usually required by law. They should be a helpful tool for everyone in the organization, but they can sometimes be problematic. And so what I want to do in just a few minutes time is cover what minutes should be, then we'll do a few tips for effective minutes, and then I'll close this part of the session by giving you some things that you should be avoiding when it comes to minutes, and some things that might rise up as what I call minute monsters that could make your minutes a lot more problematic. So first of all, a few things to remember about minutes is it's supposed to be a record of what was done during a meeting, not what was said. And this could be revolutionary for some boards and for some secretaries who have tried to record the context of what everyone has said. Unless you're going to go all the way to what we do, for example, with the provincial government, where there's the Hansard, where every single word, including coughs and vocalizations, are all recorded verbatim. So every single word is printed. Unless you're going to go that far, don't try and put people's words and comments into your minutes. It's what's really important, what you're legally responsible for, is what decisions were actually made by us, and those are what have to get recorded into your minutes. They should be clear, easy to read, and simple. If it takes you a long time to review your minutes, you've probably got too much detail. And third, they should be objective rather than subjective. Sometimes secretaries feel a need to try and bring more personality into the minutes, make them feel a little bit less legal and formal, and try and give a better feel for what took place at the meeting. In my opinion, and there are a lot of opinions, even among parliamentarians, on what makes good minutes, and if some of you don't like my ideas, that's fine, use other ideas. But I really think that there's some value to making sure that they stay highly on the objective side and not enter into how people felt about a meeting. I think that's really critical. Consider your minutes and your newsletters to be two things. And again, this is a good example where you get some different opinions, but you're getting my opinions for today. That's the way it works. I really think that communication is one of the key things that causes boards to stumble, and we do a whole workshop on communication. But for today, if you really want to convey what took place at your board meetings and the decisions that were made, I would strongly consider having some type of newsletter that goes over those decisions, can talk more about the whys and hows and how things were arrived at. But in your minutes, I think it's better to keep things more simple, and that's why I've got the less is often better. If you are going to use your minutes as sort of a newsletter so people who read it can get a better feel, as we get to our last slide in a moment, I'll have an idea of how to do that as effectively as possible. Remember that it's what and not who that is important in your minutes. Some boards actually go so far as to not even name the mover or the seconder. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I should know this off the top of my head, but I believe Robert's rule says you put the name of the mover, but not the seconder in the minutes. But quite frankly, some organizations don't put either. Now you might ask, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you record that? Very simply, once a motion is made, and once the motion is stated by the chair, and by that I mean really once the debate has begun on that motion, even in a small board meeting, that motion no longer belongs to the mover. The mover doesn't even have permission to take that motion off the table and say, you know what, I shouldn't even brought this up, I'm taking that motion away. They don't have the right to do that. The moment the debate begins, we enter into a place where everyone owns that motion. So really, the mover, by the end of it, might actually vote against the motion. They might say, oh, I never thought about that. And they end up voting against the motion. But in the minutes, it looks like they strongly support this. This is another interesting point. Seconders actually could be in opposition to the motion. Someone who seconds a motion may be seconding it, wanting it to come forward because they actually want to get this motion defeated and done with and dealt with. So they second it because they want it dealt with. So consider the idea of not putting those into your minutes, and the reason why I would suggest that will come up in just a moment. I'm also going to steer you to one resource, and no, I do not get a cut of what Ellie Mina makes, so there's no value to me in this other than there'll be lots of value to you if you go to elliemina.com. There's a great resource on there called Mina's Guide to Minute Taking. It's a downloadable resource, and I would strongly encourage every board to go and pick that up. It is a great walkthrough of what to include and not to include in minutes. And it gives different approach types because Ellie recognizes it, and he's another fellow parliamentarian out of British Columbia. He is really good at recognizing that boards have different ways of approaching minutes, and he'll walk you through some different styles depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your board minutes. I'll also put in a plug and say there's a tremendous number of other resources on how to be an effective chair and just how to be an effective board member. Let's talk about minute monsters, and this will tie into the first two slides that I put. Recording debate points is something that I would encourage you not to do. However, if you do, at most, aim for the essence of what was said. It may be helpful if you make a big decision as a board. You may want to put down, here's what some of the points were for this decision. Here's why we considered going in this way. Here's 2 or 3 of the key reasons why we thought we shouldn't make this decision. And at the end of the minutes, it simply says how the vote was, what happened with the vote, that it was either adopted or defeated, or it was accepted. So when you do this, I would strongly encourage you not to put people's names beside those points. It's really not important that these 3 board members wanted this and 2 other board members wanted something else. That's what I call leading to grandstanding, where people use the minutes, and you'll even hear this in some board meetings saying, I want to clearly put into the minutes that I was against this. No, you get to vote against the motion. You don't get to use the minutes as a recording device for what you thought and your opinions on the decision. And one of the reasons why I make all of these suggestions is minutes need to come across as a neutral record of what took place in the process of doing your meeting. If you, again, putting the essence of the debate may not be a bad idea. I usually try not to even include that with my minutes or in my teaching on minutes, but if you do, at least just having the essence and bullet points. Also, a quick reminder, make sure you're not omitting decisions. Now, if there's a formal board motion and someone makes a motion, there's a vote, I'm pretty sure you'll get that into the minutes. What some boards run into is they make their decisions more informally, and I get how condo boards work. Sometimes there's not a formal, I move that. We made a decision, it's obviously unanimous, everyone says, yeah, we definitely need to go ahead and take this action or take this action. Make sure that you get those recorded into your minutes. Those are really unofficial motions. They're still decisions of the board, and you can run into all kinds of legal troubles down the road if you end up saying, well, I remember we made that decision, but there's no record of that decision going into your minutes. So keep that in mind as one of those monsters that can come back and haunt you later in time. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and what, again, I want to refer back to is what I started off with. I purposely put in a lot of information. I'm hoping that you, at the end of this session, will pick 2 or 3 things that you could implement, maybe even as early as your next meeting. Or maybe at your minutes, you're going to make 1 change and go with that. Small changes can bring great results, and they can be pretty dramatic for your organization. And don't feel overwhelmed if you feel there's too many things that you need to cover. And of course, if some of my ideas resonated, they'll lead to other more specific ideas. And I think that's the purpose of coming together for these types of sessions. I'm hopeful that maybe some of you jotted down some ideas that weren't ones I said, but as your own thought process took place, some ideas were triggered. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time to listen to some of my thoughts about board meetings and minutes. And very much appreciate you taking time out of your lunch hour here to do that. And I'm going to turn it back over to Maria. And I believe we'll be going into a bit of time of question and answer. So thank you very much.
Okay, Todd, I just want to say thank you very much for your presentation. I found it very helpful, and I'm always learning something new, and I appreciate you bringing all those wonderful, sharing your thoughts and ideas when it comes to minutes and the art of minute taking is what I like to call it. So I do thank you for that. Okay, so at this time, we are going to go ahead and we're going to open up the floor to questions. So if you do have specific questions for either myself or Todd, I encourage you to bring them forward.
Maria, we did have Marie who had requested some information on, what she said is, if someone has reported a bylaw infraction, should the complaint and board response be recorded in the minutes? Or is it permissible to omit it entirely?
I think it depends on the type of bylaw infraction that the board is dealing with. So not all infractions need to be recorded into the meeting minutes. If there's, if it's a severe situation where it requires attention from the board, then the answer is yes. You do want to be sure that you're bringing that forward, that you're putting it on the agenda, and that it's being recorded properly into the minutes. I mean, who wants to see a notice or a bylaw infraction on, Joe in unit 102 let his dog go poop on the ground and, and they never picked it up. So, small items, no, they don't. They can be omitted from minutes, but if it's something that requires attention, the answer is yes, it should be brought forward. Keep in mind that when you do that, you're clearly stating what the bylaw infraction is, and that not only is it stated clearly in the minutes, but you have a resolution to that problem as well. Okay.
Wonderful. We also have somebody who's asked, do abstains need to be recorded, or if somebody's reclused themselves, does that need to be recorded?
For myself or for Todd, jump in here anytime you'd like. I'll go ahead and respond, and then I can turn it over to you if you like.
Great.
I'm going to say yes. I think that if someone is abstaining from, I don't like it when boards abstain, to be quite honest with you. I think if you're a board member and there is a decision that needs to be made as on the board level, I don't think that you should be abstaining from that vote. That's my personal opinion. Todd, how do you feel about that?
So I agree with you substantially with that. I think abstaining should be resisted as much as possible. What I would add to the conversation is if you're recusing yourself for a conflict of interest or a pecuniary interest, that definitely should get recorded into the minutes. That's a different issue. So for example, you're pulling up because it's a conflict. That should get in. In my opinion, abstentions of a regular kind where you just chose not to vote, I would say wouldn't be. Quite frankly, in my minutes, I would suggest just putting down whether the vote was adopted or rejected, and not even putting the vote counts in. But certainly it's okay to put the vote counts in. In that case, if there were 10 people there, 2 didn't vote, I would just put 5 to 3 and not mention the abstentions at all.
Fantastic.
Perfect. Okay. That brings us to the next question, and somebody has indicated that she believes the minutes are sometimes sanitized, and she wanted to know whether or not to record the number of votes, for example, 3 for and 5 for against, sort of thing. So great. Jenny has asked about Zoom and conference meeting during pandemic times. Is that still a valid way to have the decisions recorded, given what's going on in the world right now?
I'm going to say absolutely yes. Zoom is definitely either Zoom or Team. I think it's called Team Manager. Is that correct? Any conference or video, I say, is more than acceptable, especially because we just don't understand the full extent of the pandemic during this time here. I know personally, myself and my office and my condo managers and my boards, we do Zoom meetings. We can see each other clearly. We can hear each other as well if someone is on the phone, and we're able to record minutes. This kind of brings me to the bylaws as well. Now, you want to take a look at your bylaws. If you're in the process of having, the new bylaws adopted, with respect to the Condominium Property Act, you do want to be sure that you've got, that you can allow for video conferencing and electronic voting in your minutes. However, there is an exception given the pandemic, so I see absolutely no problems with that whatsoever.
Great. Lillian has asked if there's an issue with some of, let me rephrase that. There seems to be a conflict of interest with one of the directors on her board. Should that be dealt with prior to having that board member attend that portion of the meeting?
Yeah, can I take a shot at that one?
You bet.
Please.
Sure. So if I understand the question correctly, and this is an interesting one, it really, when there's a conflict of interest, it's really up to the person who has the conflict to declare that they feel there's a conflict of interest. It's very seldom, unless there's a legal exception that I'm not aware of with a particular board or in their bylaws, it's very unusual where other members can say to someone, you've got a conflict of interest, we want you to step away from this. Sometimes that's built into the rules around discipline or suspension. So then they can be maybe excluded and you can force them out of a decision. But typically, if you may think, yeah, boy, you shouldn't be voting on this, you might give them that suggestion, but it's really up to the person themselves in most situations to say, I declare that I have an interest and I'm pulling myself out.
Great. Just stepping back for a minute when we were dealing with Jenny's questions in regards to conference meeting and other meetings during a pandemic. Somebody's also wondering if that also refers to annual general meetings as well. Are those postponed, or does anybody have an update on what the mandate order has been from the province on AGMs?
Here, I think my understanding, my understanding on this is that, here's the thing, if you're a small condo board and you have, no more than 50 individuals that are attending the annual general meeting, and you're able to put parameters in place when it comes to social distancing within that space, then you can go ahead and continue with the meeting. Again, you need to take a look at government regulations with respect to COVID-19 and what they're stating with respect to gatherings, because an AGM is still a gathering. If you can do it comfortably in a community center or at an office where there's distance between each other and you're following the proper PPE regulations, then there's no problems in moving forward with the AGM. Now, if you can't control that environment, then the answer is no. You should not be moving forward with the annual general meeting. You can, well, in my opinion, I've done a couple of small annual general meetings, and we've done them via web as well, via webinar, as well as a Zoom meeting. In my opinion, my personal opinion, again, and you may want to get some clarification on this, but in my personal opinion, is that they do work well. We can still use the chat box, we can still raise our hand, we can still vote and make motions. So that is the safer way to do it. Now, if you choose not to have the AGM, you can extend that to the following year, or maybe, maybe in 6 months, when government, has come back and said, look, we're going to lift this ban, you're able to have more than 50 people, then you can go ahead and move forward with that AGM. It's really dependent on what government tells us and when they can lift the ban on COVID-19. But right now we're limited on what we can do. Your safest way to hold an AGM is either delay it, postpone it, or do it via Zoom or webinar.
I'll just throw in a quick comment on that, and I think there's great comments, Maria. For those who are needing to conduct electronic meetings, I encourage you to Google National Association of Parliamentarians. And on the front page of their website, there'll be some links to some resources that will help you in planning electronic meetings and making sure that they're done. One of the fundamental principles is that everyone can hear each other at all times, which is, of course, most of these platforms that Maria talked about with Zoom and all that do allow for that. So I've been a part of a number of AGMs right now that are being done electronically, and overall they do work quite well. There's some things to work out and iron out with them, but they can be very effective.
Thanks, Todd.
Great, and we'll make sure that the link that Todd's talking about to the national organization goes out with the information that'll follow. So just in keeping with the whole distancing of meetings, somebody's asked about the email voting. So if a board is getting together and or not getting together and they're doing some of the work through email, how do they then ensure that that information is being translated? Does it get set to a ratification when they are able to meet in person? And I'm presuming that that would also be, that meeting in person could still be a video meeting where you can see people.
That is correct. So essentially the way that would work is, I mean, this happens all the time where, you know, a motion is made by a board member on a certain item, and you know, then you get someone to motion it, and of course you go through the process and it's approved via email. The most important thing that you have to remember is that you do need to bring that forward into your board minutes. So if that's done in person or if that's done video conference, you want to ensure that if you have a minute taker, that minute taker is keeping track of the motions via electronic means, because you will have to bring those forward at some point. So, and that some point is usually done at the next board meeting. Those motions have to be recorded. They need to be recorded. They need to be ratified at those meetings, or they're of no use. So it's really important that you want to keep that in mind. Todd, did you want to mention anything else on that?
Yeah, no, and I know, just say, I know condo boards do a lot more in between meeting decisions than most boards and most organizations. I encourage the idea of using Zoom over email to make those, do a board meeting where you've got people together. It can get, yeah, and definitely make sure you're meeting, the decisions are ratified, get into the minutes, all those are valid points. But I think boards need to try and be out of the habit of making decisions unless the very most urgent ones in between those sessions, because they can lead to a lot of challenges. So trying to push them and hold off until that actual meeting takes place.
That's actually very good advice. Not that it's always possible.
Yeah, can't always be done.
No. So one person in particular has a board member who doesn't use the internet and is trying to push to have a meeting in a community center in a small town where best social distancing practices can take place. They're concerned for the safety of the staff that they have or others. They're wondering if they can therefore decline. Correct me if I'm wrong, but one person doesn't make a quorum, correct?
Todd, I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understood the question. Like I'm not sure I totally got the question. Sorry.
So it sounds like one person's board, one person on the board of this particular group doesn't have means for electronic meetings, and therefore that one person is looking at really wanting to have social distancing at a community center where they can safely do it.
Okay.
But at the same time, their concern is for the safety of their staff.
Right. So I think if the bylaws of that association do allow for electronic meetings, which most do, then, you know, obviously I think to me, the solution forward is to try and provide the electronic means for that person. I think the better way forward for that is to try and get them so they can be hooked up electronically. I don't think one person's not willingness to have the meetings done electronically would be enough for me to push in that direction. But that is a bit of a tough one. I'll have to think about that a bit.
Great. So maybe you can share your thoughts with us afterwards, Todd, on that, and we can bring that up a little bit more. So Marie has asked, do you find 5 board members or 7 board members work best for the number of people on a board?
Well, that's typically based on your bylaws and what your bylaws call for. So, you know, it's, again, I've got to refer you back to the bylaws on that one. If it's a big, you know, if you've got over 200-300 units, then 7 or 9 members might be, you know, might be better, and a little bit more efficient to run those board meetings. If you have a smaller board, let's say, you know, anywhere between 10 to 20, perhaps 3 to 5 is a little bit more controlled. But again, you need to there's 2 things I always do. 1, take a look at the environment, and 2, take a look at the bylaws. And based on the environment and based on the type of condominium community or condo, you as a board can make that decision. That's not, I don't think that's there's a right or wrong answer to that question. I just think that you need to take a look at some different factors involved in that environment for that condo.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think, yeah, it's about the culture and the makeup of the organization you're working with. There's not really one right answer for that, for sure. Yeah.
Great. I think we have room for 2 questions. One is, can a board chair make a motion for items that need to be voted on, or should that be left up to the members or the directors present to make the motion?
So I can answer that one. Yes, it is acceptable for the board chair to make motions. In large assemblies where it's 12 or more people, it's usually considered wrong for the board chair to enter into debate or to make motions. In small boards, Robert's rules suggest that it is totally acceptable and can be valuable for chairs to make decisions.
Great, thanks. And somebody has requested, if somebody needs to abstain, does that mean that you no longer have quorum?
Well, I think we kind of touched on that a little bit, is that I prefer that we don't abstain for motions. I think you've got to take a look at how many board members are present for that meeting. I think that's a tough one for me to answer. I'm going to turn that one over to Todd.
Yeah, so as far as the abstaining, where I just choose not to vote because I don't either have an opinion or I'm not sure what my opinion is, and again, we're avoiding that, but if you do abstain, that doesn't affect your quorum at all because you're still present at the meeting. And I have to admit, I am stumped a bit on the other side of that question, so I'll put that into my answer response as well. My gut instinct is if a person was doing conflict of interest and removing themselves from that part of the meeting, I don't believe that would affect quorum either. But I'm going to check that out, and I'll put that into my email response to make sure I get that right.
I don't think it affects quorum, Todd.
I don't think so either.
I don't think so. I've been, you know, in those situations, not very often. You know, it's come up, I think, maybe once or twice, and we still move forward with those meetings. But I'm like you know, unless there's a conflict of interest and, you know, and if there's a conflict of interest and they need to remove themselves from voting, then that's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's the only time I'm not unsure because they're not part of the meeting at that time. So yeah, I'll double check.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think we're ready to wrap it up here. I do want to say thank you to Todd for being part of our presentation here today, for part of the webinar. I hope you as members and if you're not members and you're, you know, just joining in because you want to learn, then I'm hoping that that everyone was able to take something away today. So on behalf of CCI South, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out today and spending, you know, an hour with us to go over the art of minute taking and board meetings. If you would like to learn more about CCI, please log on to our website at CCI South Alberta I think it's .ca, and also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We've got great resources on, you know, through social media. We do have upcoming events that will also be posted through social media as well. So please look for those announcements. Folks, again, thank you. Stay safe. And we will chat with you next time. Thanks, folks. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.